The glass shattered against the wall, missing Sarah's head by inches. She didn't flinch anymore. 3 years of marriage to Frank had taught her that showing fear only made it worse. But Frank was dead now, killed in a saloon brawl 2 months ago, and Sarah had thought her nightmare was over. She was wrong. His debts had passed to her, and the men who came collecting didn't care that she had nothing left. "Last chance, girl," growled the larger of the two men, his tobacco-stained teeth showing through a cruel smile. "Pay up, or we take it out in trade." Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched the silver locket around her neck, the only thing of value she owned, her mother's last gift before the fever took her. The Golden Bell Saloon buzzed with evening crowds, but no one looked her way. In a town like Redemption Creek, people learned to mind their business. Before you continue with Sarah's story, I want to ask you something important. If you're enjoying this tale, please take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. Your support truly motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. I'd also love to know, where are you listening from right now? Please share in the comments below. The lady said she doesn't have your money. The voice cut through the saloon noise like a knife through silk, quiet but carrying an edge that made both debt collectors freeze. Sarah's eyes snapped to the doorway where a man stood silhouetted against the dying sunlight. He was tall, powerfully built, with shoulders that filled the frame and hands that hung loose at his sides, ready. Even in shadow, she could see the defined muscles of his forearms beneath rolled-up sleeves. The kind of strength that came from years of ranch work, not saloon brawls. He stepped into the lamplight, and Sarah's breath caught. He couldn't have been more than 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and intense, currently fixed on the two men threatening her. A jagged scar ran along his left jawline, giving his handsome face a dangerous quality that matched the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. "This ain't your concern, Thornton," the smaller debt collector spat, but his voice wavered. "The widow owes us, and we're collecting." "Jackson Thornton," Sarah whispered, recognition flooding through her. Everyone in 3 counties knew that name, the widow's son. His mother had died, bringing him into the world, and his father had raised him alone on the sprawling Thornton Ranch until old age claimed him last winter. Now Jackson ran the place by himself, respected by honest men and feared by dishonest ones. "She's a person, not property," Jackson said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "And you're done here." The larger man made the mistake of reaching for his gun. He didn't even clear leather before Jackson moved, a blur of motion that ended with the debt collector on the floor, guns skittering across the boards, and Jackson's boot on his wrist. "Get out," Jackson said simply. "Tell your boss Frank's debts died with Frank. Anyone comes for this woman again answers to me." They left, stumbling over each other in their haste. The saloon returned to its previous noise level, conversations resuming as if nothing had happened. Sarah stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, unsure whether to run or speak. Jackson turned to her, and his expression softened in a way that made her chest tighten. "You all right?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Up close, he was even more striking, the kind of masculine beauty that came from honest work and clear conscience. His eyes traveled over her face with concern, not the leering assessment she'd grown accustomed to from men. "You're Sarah Patterson," he said. It wasn't a question. "Frank's widow." "I am." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Thank you for." "I don't know how to repay." "Don't need repayment for doing what's right." He glanced around the saloon, his jaw tightening. "You work here?" "I waitress. Tips barely cover a room at the boarding house, but it's all I can get. No one in town wants to hire Frank Patterson's widow. They think I'm bad luck, or worse." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. 3 months of desperation and loneliness breaking through her carefully maintained composure. Jackson studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind those gray eyes. "Can you cook?" The question caught her off guard. Yes. My mother taught me before she passed. My ranch needs a cook. Last one quit 3 weeks ago. Said living that far from town was too lonely. He pulled out a leather pouch, counted out several silver dollars, and placed them on the bar. That's for tonight and tomorrow. Day after, if you want the job. Wagon leaves from the general store at dawn. 3 meals a day for me and 4 ranch hands. Room in the main house, separate from the men's quarters. $20 a month plus board. Sarah's mind reeled. $20 was more than she made in 3 months at the saloon. But living on a ranch, isolated, with 5 men? I see what you're thinking, Jackson said quietly, and there was something in his voice, a gentleness that didn't match his dangerous exterior. You're not property, Sarah. You're a person worth saving. No one touches you. No one disrespects you. You have my word, and in this county, that means something. She looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity. Against every instinct honed by years of cruelty, she heard herself say, "I'll be there." The Thornton Ranch spread across the valley like a promise. Golden grasslands dotted with cattle, a creek running silver through the middle, and mountains rising purple in the distance. The house itself was solid timber and stone, built to last generations, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Jackson helped her down from the wagon with a hand that was calloused but careful, and Sarah felt the strength in his grip, the warmth that seeped through her worn gloves. He released her quickly, as if touching her longer might burn them both. "Kitchen's through there," he said, gesturing to the house. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. Lock on the inside, keys on the dresser. You need anything at all, you tell me." The 4 ranch hands introduced themselves with respectful nods, weathered men in their 40s and 50s who looked at Jackson with obvious loyalty and at Sarah with carefully neutral expressions. She understood. They were reserving judgment, waiting to see if she'd prove herself or cause trouble. She proved herself. By the end of the first week, she'd reorganized the entire kitchen, replaced the burnt coffee with properly brewed batches, and filled the house with smells that brought the men to meals early. Biscuits that melted on the tongue, stew rich with beef and vegetables from the garden she'd already started planning to expand, pies made from wild berries she found growing near the creek. Jackson ate in silence mostly, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something else underneath, something that made her pulse quicken when their eyes met across the table. "Best meal I've had since Ma died," one of the hands said on the 8th night, and the others murmured agreement. "Sarah's got a gift," Jackson said simply, and the way he said her name, like something precious, made warmth flood through her chest. That night, she stood on the porch watching the sunset, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. She heard Jackson's boots on the wood behind her, but didn't turn. "You settling in all right?" he asked, coming to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Better than all right," she admitted. "I haven't felt safe I can't remember how long. You are safe here." His voice was low, certain. "I meant what I said in town." She finally looked at him, this man who'd appeared like something from a fever dream and changed everything. In the dying light, his features were softer, the scar on his jaw just another part of a face she was beginning to find dangerously attractive. "Why did you help me?" The question had haunted her for days. "You didn't know me." Jackson was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My mother died bringing me into this world. My father spent his life making sure I understood that didn't make me a debt or a burden. It made me a gift she gave with her last breath. He taught me to see value in people, especially when they can't see it in themselves." He turned to face her fully. "When I saw you in that saloon, cornered and afraid but not broken, I saw a woman worth saving." The phrase echoed through her, the same words he'd used that first night, and Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she built to survive Frank, to survive the cruelty and fear. "I'm not good at this," she whispered. "At trusting, at believing someone might help without wanting something in return." "Then we'll go slow," Jackson said. "As slow as you need." The weeks blended into months, and Sarah found herself transforming in ways she hadn't thought possible. Jackson taught her to ride, his hands steadying her in the saddle, his voice patient as he corrected her posture. She learned to shoot, his body warm behind hers, as he showed her how to aim the rifle, how to breathe through the recoil. "You're a natural," he said, after she hit 3 bottles in a row, and his pride made her chest swell in a way that had nothing to do with marksmanship. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings when mist still clung to the grass, the long afternoons when heat shimmered over the valley, the cool evenings when the men gathered on the porch to smoke and tell stories. She learned the hands' names, their histories, their preferences for how they took their coffee. Most of all, she learned Jackson. She learned he woke before dawn every day, no matter the weather, and checked every inch of fence line himself rather than delegating. She learned he paid his hands more than other ranches, treated them like family rather than employees. She learned he read poetry, volumes of Whitman and Dickinson hidden in his bedroom that she discovered while cleaning, and that he sometimes stood at his mother's grave marker near the old oak tree, speaking to her like she might answer. She learned the scar on his jaw came from a knife fight defending a native family from raiders, that he'd taken 3 wounds that night to save people the town considered less than human. She learned he donated cattle to the reservation every winter, anonymously, because starving people don't care about politics. And she learned that his eyes followed her across rooms, that his hands trembled slightly when he helped her down from wagons, that he made excuses to be in the kitchen when she cooked, just to be near her. The realization hit her one morning in late August. She was kneading bread dough, lost in the rhythm of it, when Jackson came in smelling of leather and horses and summer wind. He grabbed the coffee pot, poured himself a cup, and just stood there watching her work with that expression on his face. The one she'd finally figured out was longing mixed with restraint. She was falling in love with him. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in years. "Jackson," she said quietly, and he straightened, sensing something different in her tone. "Yes? Thank you." She kept kneading, meeting the motion to ground her. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me a chance when no one else would, for treating me like what you are," he interrupted gently. "Someone strong and brave and worth every good thing this world has to offer." She looked up then and found him closer than she'd realized. The space between them charged with months of careful restraint. His eyes searched her face, asking a question he wouldn't voice. Sarah made the choice. She closed the distance, flour-dusted hands coming up to frame his face, and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Jackson froze, shocked. Then his arms came around her waist, careful even in passion, and he kissed her back with a desperation that matched her own. He tasted like coffee and promise, and when his hands tightened on her waist, she didn't flinch. She pressed closer. "Go slow," she whispered against his lips when they broke apart, both breathing hard. "It hurts to trust this much." "I'll die before I hurt you," Jackson swore, his forehead pressed to hers. "Sarah, I've been half in love with you since that night in the saloon. Watching you bloom here, become yourself again. It's been the greatest privilege of my life." "Just half?" she teased, feeling lighter than air. "Trying to be a gentleman about it," he rumbled, and the desire in his voice sent heat pooling in her stomach. "But if I'm being honest, I'm entirely, completely, desperately in love with you." She kissed him again, longer this time, and felt his control fracture just slightly. Felt the tremor in his hands, the way his breath came faster. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with want, but still cautious, still waiting for her to set the pace. "I love you too," she said, and watched joy transform his face into something almost boyish. The summer idyll shattered on a Tuesday morning in September. Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard horses, Too many horses, moving too fast. She turned toward the sound, shading her eyes against the sun, and her blood turned to ice. Frank's brother, Marcus Patterson, rode at the head of 6 men, all armed, all wearing expressions that promised violence. She'd met Marcus once, at the wedding Frank had forced her into, and he'd looked at her the same way he looked at his horses, calculating their worth, finding them wanting. Jackson appeared from the barn, and the 4 ranch hands emerged from various outbuildings, all moving to form a loose line between the approaching riders and Sarah. She ran toward them, her heart hammering. "Stay behind me," Jackson said quietly when she reached him, and there was steel in his voice she'd never heard before. Marcus reined in 10 feet away, dust settling around his horse's hooves. Well, well, the widow's playing house with Jackson Thornton. Frank would be rolling in his grave. "Frank can rot," Sarah said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "His debts died with him. I owe you nothing." "See, that's where you're wrong, sweetheart." Marcus grinned, showing teeth stained dark from tobacco. "Frank signed papers before he died. Left me as executor of his estate, which includes you. Wives are property, in case you forgot." "Not anymore," Jackson said flatly. "Territory law changed 3 months ago. Sarah's a free woman. Papers say different." Marcus pulled a folded document from his coat. "Judge in Silver City signed off on it. She comes with me or we take her. Your choice, Thornton." "There's a third choice," Jackson said, and his hand drifted toward his gun. "You ride out of here and forget you ever came." Marcus laughed. 6 against 5? You always were bad at math." 6 against 1, Jackson corrected. "My men don't fight my battles. This is between us." "Jackson, no," Sarah gasped. But he didn't look at her, didn't break eye contact with Marcus. "High noon tomorrow," Jackson continued. "Town square, just you and me. Sarah's freedom is the stakes." Marcus considered this, clearly liking his odds. Jackson was known as a good shot, but Marcus had killed 3 men in duels. "You got yourself a deal, Thornton. But when I win, I'm taking what's mine, and I'll make sure you're alive to watch what I do to her." They rode out, and Sarah turned on Jackson the moment they were gone, fury and terror warring in her chest. "Are you insane? He'll kill you." "Maybe." Jackson finally looked at her, and his eyes were calm as a still pond. "But I won't let him take you. I'd rather die than see you in chains again." "Then you're a fool," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "I just found you. I just started living again. You can't." He pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head. "Sarah, listen to me. I've been ready to die since my father passed. Didn't see much point in living beyond keeping the ranch running. But you gave me a reason to wake up smiling, to plan for a future instead of just surviving each day." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "If I die tomorrow, I die knowing I loved you and was loved in return. That's more than most men get in a lifetime." "There has to be another way," she insisted. But even as she said it, she knew there wasn't. Men like Marcus didn't respond to reason or law. They responded to strength. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed listening to the house settle, thinking about Jackson dying in the street because of her. The thought was unbearable. She rose in the darkness and padded downstairs, finding him sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his guns by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Sarah shook her head and moved closer, her nightgown brushing the floor. "Teach me something." "At this hour?" "Teach me that you trust me to be strong enough for what comes next," she said. "Teach me that whatever happens tomorrow, we're together in this." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He stood, crossing to her, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "Together," he repeated, and the word was a vow. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, pouring months of restrained desire into the contact. Sarah melted against him, her hands exploring the muscles of his back through his shirt. feeling the power coiled beneath his skin. When his hands slid down to her waist, she didn't freeze. She arched into him, wanting more. "Sarah," he groaned against her neck, "if we don't stop now, then don't stop," she whispered. "I want this. I want you. All of you, Jackson. Tonight, tomorrow, all the days after, if we're blessed enough to have them." He swept her into his arms and carried her upstairs, kicking his bedroom door shut behind them. In the lamplight, he undressed her with reverent hands, touching her like something sacred and precious. When she reached for his shirt, he helped her, and she traced the scars on his chest, evidence of a life lived protecting others. "You're beautiful," she whispered, and meant it in ways that transcended the physical. Beautiful in spirit, in courage, in the way he'd given her back herself. They came together slowly, carefully, Jackson watching her face for any sign of fear or pain. There was neither. There was only trust, only desire, only the rightness of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. "I love you," she gasped, as pleasure built between them. "God, Jackson, I love you." "I love you," he answered, and the words were punctuated with kisses, with touches, with whispered promises against sweat-slicked skin. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Sarah's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Promise me something," she said quietly. "Anything. Promise me that if something happens tomorrow, if you're hurt—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I promise to fight like hell to come back to you," he said. "I promise that my last thought, if it comes to that, will be of you. And I promise that whatever happens, you'll be free. That document Marcus has is worthless. I've already filed papers with the territorial governor declaring you an independent citizen. Whether I live or die, you'll never be anyone's property again." Fresh tears slipped down her face, but these were different. Gratitude mixed with love so intense it bordered on pain. "How did I get this lucky?" she whispered. "We both got lucky," he corrected. "The universe owed us each something good. Maybe it sent us to each other." They made love again as dawn approached, slower this time, savoring every touch like it might be the last. Sarah memorized the feel of his skin, the sound of his breathing, the way he said her name like a prayer. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jackson dressed carefully. He strapped on his gun belt, checked the chambers of his Colt, and stood for a moment, looking at his reflection in the mirror. Sarah came up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "Come back to me." "I will," he promised, "or die trying." They rode into town together, her on the horse he'd taught her to ride, him on his black stallion. The streets of Redemption Creek were crowded. Word had spread fast about the duel, and it seemed like the whole county had turned out to watch. Marcus stood in the center of the square, surrounded by his men, that cruel smile playing on his lips. "Brought your woman to watch? Thoughtful. She can cry over your corpse before I take her home." Jackson dismounted, helped Sarah down, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Stay with the sheriff," he murmured. "He's a good man. He'll protect you if—" "No," she said fiercely. "I'm staying right here." "You're going to win because you have to. Because I need you. Because we have a life to build together." He smiled at her then, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Yes, ma'am." The sheriff counted down from 10. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. The world narrowed to Jackson's back, straight and strong, Marcus's slouching form across the square. "Draw!" Both men moved. Sarah saw it happen in horrible slow motion. Jackson's hand flashing to his holster, Marcus doing the same. 2 shots rang out as one, echoing off the buildings. Marcus staggered, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He fell to his knees, then face first into the dirt. He didn't move again. Jackson stood frozen for a moment, smoke curling from his gun barrel. Then he holstered the weapon and turned toward Sarah. That's when she saw the blood. A dark stain spreading across his left side, just below his ribs. "Jackson!" She ran to him as he swayed, catching him before he fell. "No, no, no, please." "Just a graze," he managed, but his face had gone gray. "Sarah, Someone get the doctor," she screamed, lowering him to the ground as gently as she could. The crowd pressed close, but she barely noticed. Her whole world had narrowed to Jackson's face, to keeping pressure on the wound that was bleeding far too much for a graze. "Stay with me," she begged. You promised to come back to me." "Trying," he whispered. His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "Love you. So much." "I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request." She bathed his fevered skin with cool cloths, spooned broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, changed his bandages with hands that shook but never faltered. The ranch hands took turns bringing food, offering to spell her, but she refused. "I need to do this," she told them. "I need him to know I'm here." On the fourth day, his fever broke. Sarah woke from an exhausted doze in the chair beside his bed to find his gray eyes open, clear, and fixed on her face. "Hey," he rasped. "Hey yourself," she managed, fresh tears spilling over. "You scared me half to death." "Sorry." His hand lifted, trembling, to touch her face. "You're here. Where else would I be? I love you, you stubborn fool. Don't you ever do that to me again." A weak smile curved his lips. "Deal. But Sarah, I won. You're free, really, truly free." She leaned down carefully, mindful of his injuries, and kissed him softly. "I was already free. You gave me that the night you walked into the saloon. Everything since has just been learning to believe it." Jackson's recovery was slow but steady. Sarah moved him back to the ranch as soon as the doctor allowed, set up his bed in the downstairs parlor so he wouldn't have to manage stairs. She cooked healing foods, rich bone broths, iron-heavy liver, fresh vegetables from the garden. She read to him from his poetry books, her voice filling the house with Whitman's vast, hopeful verses. The ranch hands stepped up, handling the daily operations without being asked. They'd come to respect Sarah over the summer months, and seeing her fierce devotion to Jackson only deepened that respect. "Never seen him smile the way he does when he looks at you," one hand told her one evening. "You're good for him, ma'am. Real good." 6 weeks after the shooting, Jackson was strong enough to walk to the creek without assistance. Sarah walked beside him, her hand tucked into his good arm, both of them moving slowly through the autumn gold grass. "I've been thinking," Jackson said as they reached the water's edge, "about the future, about what I want." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, though she thought she knew. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want to marry you. Proper church wedding. The whole town invited. Everything legal and binding. I want you to be my wife in every way that matters." "I'm already your wife in the only way that matters," she said, smiling. "In my heart." "Then marry me in the eyes of God and the law," he pressed. "Let me give you my name, my protection, my everything. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "Jackson Thornton, you are the worthiest man I've ever known. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want." "How about next Sunday?" He grinned. "Gives you time to find a dress, and me time to convince the preacher to make the trip out here, since I'm still not supposed to ride that far." They married on a crisp October Sunday, under the old oak tree where Jackson's mother was buried. The ranch hands served as witnesses, dressed in their cleanest clothes. Sarah wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers from the creek woven into her hair. Jackson stood tall in a new black suit, the scar on his jaw stark against his tan skin, his eyes never leaving her face. "I, Jackson Thornton, take you, Sarah Patterson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you all the days of my life. You are not my property. You are my partner, my equal, my heart made flesh. Together." "Together," Sarah repeated, tears streaming down her face. "I, Sarah Patterson, take you, Jackson Thornton, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you, to support you, to love you through every trial and triumph. You saw me when I was invisible, saved me when I was drowning. You gave me myself back. Together, always together." The preacher pronounced them married, and Jackson kissed her softly, sweetly, with a promise of passion saved for later. The hands cheered, and someone produced a fiddle, and they danced in the grass as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the whole world gold. That night, in the bedroom they would now share, Jackson made love to his wife with a tenderness that bordered on worship. "I can't believe you're mine," he whispered against her skin. "I'm not yours," Sarah corrected gently. "I'm my own. But I choose to share myself with you, freely and completely. There's a difference." "The best difference," he agreed, and showed her with his body what his words couldn't express: reverence, gratitude, love so deep it had no bottom. The years that followed were not without hardship. Ranching was brutal work, and the territory was slowly being civilized in ways that changed everything. But Sarah and Jackson faced it all together. Droughts and blizzards, market crashes and cattle thieves, the slow transformation of the wild frontier into something more settled and safe. They never had children, though they tried. Sarah mourned each loss privately, but Jackson held her through the grief and reminded her that they were enough, just the two of them. They poured their love into the ranch instead, expanding it to include a small school for the children of ranch families, a medical clinic that served the whole county, a sanctuary for people fleeing the kind of violence Sarah had once endured. The old saloon in Redemption Creek closed down, replaced by a general store. The town grew prosperous and peaceful, and people sometimes forgot the rough early days when justice came from a gun and survival was never guaranteed. But Sarah never forgot. She never forgot the night Jackson walked into her life and changed everything. She never forgot the feeling of his hands steadying her on a horse, teaching her to shoot, holding her while she cried. She never forgot the way he'd been willing to die for her freedom, and the way she'd fought to keep him alive because a world without him wasn't worth living in. On their 25th anniversary, they stood together at the creek where they'd walked after his recovery, both of them grayer now, lines etched deeper into their faces. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked. "Marrying a broken woman instead of someone whole?" Jackson turned to her with disbelief in his eyes. "You were never broken, Sarah. You were bent by cruelty, yes, but not broken. And you didn't need me to fix you. You needed space to heal yourself." He pulled her close. "Marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. You made this place a home instead of just a house. You made me understand what my father meant when he said love is choosing someone every single day. I choose you today, tomorrow, and every day after until I die." "Together," Sarah whispered, the word that had become their talisman, their promise, their prayer. "Together," Jackson agreed. Years later, when they were both old and gray, when the territory had become a state and the frontier had faded into memory, people would still tell the story of the widow's son and the beautiful waitress. They'd tell how he'd saved her in a saloon, how she'd saved him right back when a bullet nearly took him from this world. They'd tell how their love had transformed a ranch into a haven, how their partnership had shown a whole community what marriage could be when it was based on respect instead of ownership. But the best part of the story, the part that made listeners smile, was the simplest. The widow's son had healed the beautiful waitress, not knowing she would repay him with love that lasted until their final breaths and beyond. The winter of 1887 came early and fierce, bringing with it challenges that would test everything Sarah and Jackson had built together. Snow fell in thick curtains across the valley, burying fence posts and turning the ranch into an isolated white fortress. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching the storm rage while stirring a pot of stew that would feed the hands trapped in the bunkhouse. Haven't seen it this bad in 20 years, Jackson said, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. At 43, he was still powerfully built, though silver now threaded through his dark hair, and his movements carried the careful deliberation of old injuries that ached in cold weather. "The cattle?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer from the tension in his shoulders. "Lost another dozen head this morning." They wandered into a ravine trying to escape the wind. His voice was heavy with frustration. "We're losing too many, Sarah. If this keeps up through February, we won't have enough stock to make it to spring sales." Sarah turned in his arms, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "Then we'll figure something out. We always do. Together, remember?" "Together," he echoed, but worry still clouded his gray eyes. The next morning brought a stranger to their door, a young woman, maybe 20, riding a half-dead horse and carrying a bundle wrapped in ragged blankets. Sarah answered the frantic knocking to find the girl collapsed on the porch, ice crystals frozen to her eyelashes. "Please," the stranger whispered through blue-tinged lips, "my baby. Help my baby." Jackson appeared instantly, taking in the situation with the quick assessment of a man who'd seen his share of crises. "Get her inside. I'll stable the horse." He was already moving, efficient, despite the storm still howling around them. Sarah helped the young woman into the warm kitchen, settling her near the stove while unwrapping the bundle with shaking hands. A tiny face emerged, an infant, maybe 3 months old, silent and frighteningly still. "Is he?" the mother choked out, unable to finish. Sarah pressed her fingers to the baby's neck, searching for a pulse. There, faint but present. "He's alive, barely. When did he last eat?" "Yesterday morning. We ran out of food 2 days ago. I was trying to reach my sister in Silver Creek when the storm hit." Tears streamed down the woman's face. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. I saw your lights and—" "Hush now," Sarah said firmly, already moving to heat milk and honey. Not ideal for an infant, but better than nothing. "You did exactly right. I'm Sarah Thornton, and this is my husband Jackson's ranch. You're safe here." Jackson came in, stamping snow from his boots, took one look at the baby, and immediately started issuing orders. "Sarah, get them both warm. I'll ride out to the Delacroix place. Marie's still nursing her youngest. She can wet nurse this little one until the mother's strong enough." "You can't ride in this," Sarah protested, but Jackson was already pulling on his heaviest coat. "I can and I will. That baby needs proper milk, and he needs it now." He paused long enough to kiss her forehead. "I'll be back before nightfall. Keep the fire high." Sarah watched him disappear into the white wall of snow, her heart tight with fear and pride. This was who he was, the man who'd walk through hell itself to save someone in need. The same man who'd saved her all those years ago in that saloon. The young mother's name was Claire, and her story spilled out in broken fragments as Sarah worked to warm her and the baby. An abusive husband who'd drunk away their savings, a desperate escape in the night, a sister who might take her in if she could just reach her. "I know how this sounds," Claire said, tears still flowing, "but I couldn't stay. He was getting worse, and I was so afraid for Tommy. That's the baby. I was afraid he'd hurt him." Sarah gripped the young woman's hand, memory washing over her like a tide. "I know exactly how it sounds, because I lived it too. My first husband was a monster. I thought I'd die married to him, until someone showed me I had value beyond what any man said I did." Claire's eyes widened. "You?" "Me," Sarah smiled sadly. "So I understand running. I understand being so scared you can barely breathe. And I understand finding out that survival is braver than you ever imagined." She squeezed Claire's hand. "You're going to make it through this, both of you." Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah kept Claire and the baby warm, spooned broth into the mother while the infant slept fitfully against her chest. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and as afternoon faded toward evening, Sarah's worry for Jackson grew into something sharp-edged and painful. "He should be back by now," she murmured, staring out the window at the endless white. "Your husband?" Claire asked weakly. "He went to get help for your son, but the storm—" Sarah didn't finish. Couldn't finish. The frontier had taught her too well how quickly a man could die in weather like this, lost in the white blindness, frozen before he even knew what was happening. Just as true darkness fell, she heard horses, multiple horses, and voices calling. Sarah ran to the door, flinging it open to find Jackson leading 3 riders, Marie Delacroix, her husband Baptiste, and their eldest son. All were covered in snow and ice, but alive. Jackson's face was gray with cold, his movements stiff. "Got her," he said through chattering teeth, gesturing to Marie. "And Baptiste insisted on coming in case we needed to dig out drifts." They crowded into the kitchen, bringing cold air and relief with them. Marie went straight to Claire and the baby, her experienced hands assessing the situation quickly. "The little one needs to eat immediately," she said in her French-accented English. "Claire, you are strong enough to help me?" What followed was a lesson in feminine strength and solidarity that made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. Marie nursed the baby while coaching Claire on maintaining her own milk supply. Baptiste and Jackson talked quietly about organizing a rescue mission to Silver Creek once the storm broke. The teenage Delacroix boy entertained everyone with stories of a fox he'd been tracking. This was community. This was what the frontier became when people chose kindness over self-preservation. That night, after their guests had settled into spare rooms and the house had quieted, Sarah found Jackson on the porch despite the cold. He'd stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped himself in a heavy blanket, but he was still shivering. "You're going to catch your death out here," she scolded, but her hands were already working to warm him, rubbing his arms vigorously. "Needed air," he said. "Needed to think." "About what?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the storm that still raged across the valley. "I was lost out there for about an hour. Complete whiteout. Couldn't see the horse's head, much less where I was going. I thought I might not make it back." Sarah's hands stilled, her heart lurching. "Jackson, and all I could think was that I hadn't told you this morning how much I love you. That I'd just kissed you and left, like any other day." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight from the window, she could see the raw emotion in his eyes. 25 years together, and I still wake up grateful you're beside me. Still can't believe someone like you chose someone like me." "Someone like you?" Sarah's voice came out fierce. "You're the best man I've ever known. You rode into a blizzard to save a stranger's child, Jackson. You've spent our entire marriage being exactly the kind of man who deserves to be loved desperately." He pulled her against his chest, blanket wrapping around them both. "I love you, Sarah Fortin. In this life, and whatever comes after, I need you to know that." "I do know it," she whispered against his shirt. "I've known it every day since you walked into that saloon. But I love hearing you say it, so say it again." "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you, I love you, I love you." They stood there in the cold, holding each other against the storm, and Sarah felt the same certainty she'd felt on their wedding day. This was her home. Not the ranch, not the house. Jackson. His arms, his heart, his unwavering presence. This was where she belonged. The storm finally broke 3 days later, revealing a landscape transformed. The valley glittered white under brilliant sunshine, beautiful and deadly. They found 37 head of cattle frozen in various gullies and ravines, a devastating loss that would set the ranch back significantly. But they also found something else, evidence of rustlers working the storm as cover. Jackson and Baptiste discovered tracks leading northeast toward the territorial border, along with signs of at least 50 head being driven off in the chaos. "They knew exactly what they were doing," Jackson said grimly, studying the trampled snow. "Waited for the worst of it, then moved in while we were all focused on survival. Sarah felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. What do? We track them, Jackson said, and we get our cattle back. What followed was the most dangerous week of Sarah's life since the duel with Marcus. Jackson, Baptiste, and 4 other ranchers formed a posse, following the rustlers' trail across frozen wasteland. Sarah insisted on coming, despite Jackson's protests. "You're not leaving me behind this time," she said flatly, checking the ammunition in the rifle he taught her to shoot years ago. "We're partners, remember? Together means together." He'd looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but you stay with the group. No heroics, says the man who rides into blizzards alone," she shot back, but she was smiling. They caught up to the rustlers camped in a box canyon, confident they'd made a clean escape. Jackson called out from cover, giving them a chance to surrender. Their answer was bullets. The gunfight that followed was brief but brutal. Sarah fired 3 shots that she knew hit their marks, dropping men who were trying to flank their position. Jackson took a bullet through his left arm, but kept fighting, his face set in lines of controlled fury. When the smoke cleared, 4 rustlers lay dead, and 2 had surrendered, hands raised high. "You shot me," Jackson said with something like wonder in his voice as Sarah bandaged his arm roughly, hands shaking with aftershock. "They shot you first," she snapped, terror making her voice sharp. "How many times are you going to make me watch you bleed?" "Hopefully this is the last," he said, then winced as she pulled the bandage tight. "Sarah, you saved my life back there. That man had me dead to rights until you dropped him." She looked up at him, seeing the truth of it in his eyes. "We save each other," she said simply. "That's what we do. That's what we've always done." They recovered most of the stolen cattle and returned to the ranch as heroes, the story of their tracking and recovery spreading through the county. But Sarah felt no triumph, only exhaustion and gratitude that Jackson was alive, that they'd survived another trial together. That night, as she carefully changed the bandage on his arm, Jackson caught her hand. "I think it's time," he said quietly. "Time for what?" "To step back from the dangerous parts of this life. We're not young anymore, Sarah. And every time I take a risk now, I think about you alone if something happens to me." He paused. "I want to grow old with you. Really old. Gray hair and rocking chairs and grandchildren we borrow from our friends since we couldn't have our own." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You want to retire?" "Not completely, but maybe hire a foreman to handle the day-to-day. Focus on the school and clinic we've built. Spend more time just being together." He pulled her down onto the bed beside him, careful of his injured arm. "I've spent our whole marriage working to build something that would last. But you're what I want to last, Sarah. Us. This. Whatever time we have left, I want to spend it with you, not fighting rustlers in snowstorms." She kissed him softly, tasting salt from her own tears. "Yes, God, yes, let's grow old together, Jackson. Let's finally just be." They did exactly that. Over the next 5 years, they transitioned the ranch to new management while building up the community services they'd started. The Thornton School educated children from 3 counties. The Thornton Clinic treated everyone regardless of ability to pay. Their home became a way station for people escaping violence, a place where Sarah could offer the help she'd once desperately needed. Claire and her son Tommy stayed on, Claire working as Sarah's assistant, while Tommy grew into a bright, curious boy who followed Jackson around like a shadow. Other women came and went, each carrying their own stories of survival and strength. Sarah taught them what she'd learned, that they were more than their scars, that healing was possible, that love existed without ownership. And through it all, Jackson was beside her. His hair went fully silver. His hands developed arthritis that made him wince on cold mornings. His step slowed, but his eyes still lit up when Sarah entered a room. He still reached for her hand without thinking. He still whispered, "I love you," against her skin in the darkness before sleep. On their 30th anniversary, they stood at the creek again, their special place, where so many important conversations had happened. The valley had changed dramatically since those early days. The town had grown, the frontier had faded, the wild edge had been civilized. But this spot remained the same, water running clear over smooth stones, cottonwoods rustling overhead. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked. "The adventure, the danger?" Jackson considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss being young and strong enough to ride all day without aching. But miss the danger? No. I've got everything I need right here." He pulled her close. "You're my adventure, Sarah. Every day with you is the best kind of unknown." She laughed, the sound still bright despite her own advancing years. "We're not very good at romance, are we? Comparing marriage to uncertainty?" "We're perfect at our kind of romance," he corrected. "The kind built on trust and partnership and choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He kissed her forehead. "I'd choose you again, Sarah. In every life, in every version of this story, I'd choose you." "Together," she whispered, the word that had carried them through 3 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." Winter returned, as it always did, bringing memories of that terrible storm and the young mother they'd saved. Claire was married now, to a good man who treated her with respect, and Tommy was preparing to attend university in the East. They visited often, and each time Claire thanked Sarah for showing her that survival was possible. "You gave me hope when I had none," Claire said during one visit, watching her teenage son laugh with Jackson over some shared joke. "You and Mr. Thornton both. You showed me what marriage could be." Sarah squeezed her hand. "You saved yourself, Claire. We just provided a safe place for you to heal. The strength was always yours." That night, as Sarah and Jackson prepared for bed, he moved slower than usual, his breathing slightly labored. She noticed, but didn't comment. He hated being fussed over, always insisted he was fine, even when he clearly wasn't. But when he climbed into bed beside her, he gathered her close with an urgency that spoke of things unsaid. "Sarah," he began, then stopped. "What is it?" She pulled back enough to see his face in the lamplight. "Nothing bad," he assured her quickly. "Just, I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone." "We've left plenty," Sarah said. "The school, the clinic, all the people we've helped. That's not what I mean." He touched her face gently. "I mean the story, our story. I want people to know that love like ours is possible, that 2 broken people can find each other and build something whole." He paused. "I want them to know that you don't have to be perfect to deserve love, that healing is a process, not a destination, that real strength comes from vulnerability, not armor." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "That's a beautiful legacy, Jackson." "Then help me write it," he said. "Tell our story to the young people who come through here looking for hope. Tell them about the widow's son and the beautiful waitress. Tell them we made it." "We did make it," Sarah whispered. "Against every odd, through every challenge. We made it, Jackson." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had for 30 years, each heartbeat in sync with the other's. And in the morning, when pale winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, they woke together, still holding on, still choosing each other, still living the greatest adventure of all. The simple, extraordinary adventure of growing old together. The spring of their 31st year brought new challenges that tested Sarah in ways she hadn't imagined. Jackson's health, which had seemed merely age-appropriate, deteriorated rapidly. What started as occasional breathlessness became persistent. The doctor from Silver Creek made the long journey to the ranch and delivered news that made Sarah's world tilt sideways. "His heart is failing," Dr. Morrison said gently. his weathered hands folded on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Maybe 6 months. A year if we're lucky and he takes it easy." "Easy?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "That man doesn't know the meaning of easy. He'll work himself into the ground trying to spare me worry." "Then you need to make him understand," the doctor said. "He needs rest, light activity only, and no stress. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, but inside she was already fracturing. After everything they'd survived, violence, storms, rustlers, poverty, loss, it was something as simple and inevitable as time that would take him from her. She told Jackson that night, sitting on the edge of their bed while he pretended to read. His hands stilled on the book, but he didn't look up. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He finally met her eyes, and she saw no fear there, only sadness. "Because I need to know how much time we have to say everything that needs saying." Sarah climbed onto the bed beside him, tucking herself against his side carefully, as if he might break. "Then we'll make every day count. No more working dawn to dusk. No more pretending you're 25. We'll spend our time doing what matters, being together." "I'm not an invalid yet," he protested, but weakly. "No, you're not. But you're also not invincible, even though you've spent our entire marriage acting like you are." She pressed her hand over his heart, feeling the irregular rhythm beneath her palm. "I need you, Jackson. Not the version of you that thinks he has to be strong enough for both of us. Just you, however much time we get." He covered her hand with his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I'm scared," he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice broke something in her chest. "Not of dying, but of leaving you alone." "I won't be alone," Sarah said fiercely. "I'll have 31 years of memories, a community we built together, and the knowledge that I was loved completely by the best man I ever knew. That's not alone, Jackson. That's rich beyond measure." They held each other as darkness fell, neither speaking, just breathing in sync. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. The silence of two people who'd learned to communicate without words, who knew each other so deeply that conversation was often unnecessary. But Jackson broke it with a whisper. "Tell me the story. Our story. I want to hear it one more time." So Sarah did. She started at the beginning, in that saloon where he'd walked into her life like something from a dream. She told him about the fear and the desperate hope, about riding out to the ranch with nothing but trust to sustain her. She told him about learning to ride, to shoot, to believe she deserved good things. "You taught me that I was worth saving," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. That's what I'll carry forward, Jackson. Every person who comes to us broken, I'll help them see what you helped me see. That survival is brave, that healing is possible, that love exists. That's my legacy," Jackson said, and she heard the satisfaction in his voice. "Not the ranch or the cattle or any of it. You, Sarah. The woman you became, the lives you've touched, the hope you give people. That's what I want to be remembered for, loving you well enough that you could heal." They made love that night, slowly and carefully, each touch a sacrament. Sarah memorized everything, the texture of his skin, the sound of his breathing, the way he said her name like a prayer. This might not be the last time, but the shadow of mortality made every moment precious in a way it hadn't been before. Afterward, Jackson fell asleep with his head on her shoulder, one hand resting on her hip. Sarah stayed awake for hours, watching him breathe, counting each inhalation like pearls on a string. She'd known this day would come eventually. They both would die, one leaving the other behind. She just thought they'd have near time. But then, hadn't that been true of every precious thing in her life? She'd thought she'd have more time with her mother before fever took her. She'd thought Frank's cruelty would kill her before she ever knew real love. Life was nothing but a series of truncated maybes, of shortened forevers. The gift was in the time you got, not the time you were denied. In the months that followed, they settled into a new rhythm. Jackson limited his activities, though he still insisted on morning walks to the creek and evening time on the porch. Sarah stayed close, never hovering but always present. They played cards in the afternoon, read to each other in the evenings, talked about everything and nothing. Tommy came to visit often, now a young man of 19 preparing to leave for Boston. He sat with Jackson for hours, absorbing stories of the old frontier, asking questions about courage and purpose and what made a life meaningful. "Love," Jackson told him one afternoon while Sarah worked in the kitchen, listening through the open window. "That's what makes it meaningful, not adventure or success or how much you accumulate. Just love, finding someone worth protecting and being vulnerable enough to let them protect you back. That's everything, son." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, her hands stilling in the bread dough. Even dying, he was teaching. Even fading, he was giving. Claire visited too, bringing her husband and younger children. She'd had 3 more babies after Tommy, and watching her with them, confident, warm, unafraid, filled Sarah with pride. This was their legacy too. The women they'd helped, the families built on foundations of respect rather than fear. "Mrs. Thornton," Claire said one day, helping Sarah with canning while Jackson napped inside, "I need you to know something. When Tommy leaves for Boston, I'm scared. But then I remember how scared I was that night I showed up here, and how you showed me that being scared doesn't mean being helpless. You gave me a template for strength. I'm passing that to my children." Sarah embraced her, this woman who'd once been a terrified girl with a dying baby. "You did the hard part, Claire. You survived. You chose life over despair. That was all you. It was you and Mr. Thornton," Claire insisted. "Together, you showed me what was possible." That word again, together, the cornerstone of everything they'd built. As summer faded into fall, Jackson grew weaker. He could no longer make the walk to the creek, so they brought the creek to him. Buckets of water, smooth stones, pressed flowers from the banks. Sarah would sit beside his bed, describing the valley in detail, painting pictures with words, so vivid he could almost see them. "Tell me what you see right now," he'd say, eyes closed but smiling. "Golden grass waving in the wind like water," Sarah would answer. "Cattle dotting the hillside, fat and healthy. The mountains purple with distance, snow already capping the peaks. The creek running bright as silver. Our home, Jackson. Everything we built together, still standing strong." "Not everything," he'd murmur. "I'm crumbling." "Your body, maybe," she'd counter, taking his hand. "But you, the essential you, that's eternal. That lives in me, in everyone you've touched. That doesn't crumble, Jackson. That endures." On a clear October morning, with frost sparkling on the grass and the sun rising gold over the mountains, Jackson woke, whispering her name. Sarah had slept in the chair beside his bed, as she had for weeks now, and she was beside him instantly. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "I'm always here." "Love you," he breathed, his voice so faint she had to lean close to hear it. "Best thing that ever happened to me was you." "I love you too," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "In this life and the next and every one after. You saved me, Jackson Thornton. You gave me myself back. How do I thank you for that?" "Live," he said simply. "Live fully, freely, without fear. That's all I ever wanted for you." His eyes found hers, still gray as storm clouds despite the weakness claiming him. "Promise me." "I promise," she whispered. "I'll live enough for both of us." He smiled then, that rare full smile she'd treasured for 31 years. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed, even though she knew what was coming. "Always together, even when I can't see you, especially then." His eyes closed, his breathing slowed, and Sarah held his hand while the man who'd saved her life slipped away as peacefully as falling asleep. The sun rose fully, painting the room in light, and she sat there with him until the doctor arrived hours later to officially pronounce what she already knew. Jackson Thornton was gone. But he wasn't. Not really. She felt him in the wind that moved through the valley, in the creek that sang over stones, in every person who stopped by to share memories of his kindness. The funeral drew people from 5 counties, ranchers and farmers, native families and townspeople. The women whose lives he'd helped save by giving Sarah a place to heal and a platform to help others. They buried him beside his parents under the old oak tree where they'd married. Sarah stood at the graveside with dry eyes, having cried herself empty over the previous days. She listened to the preacher talk about a life well lived, about love and service and integrity. But the words that mattered most came from Tommy, now a young man who'd learned what it meant to be good from watching Jackson. Mr. Thornton told me once that the measure of a man isn't in what he takes, but in what he gives, Tommy said, his voice steady despite his tears. He gave everything, his strength to those who were weak, his protection to those who were vulnerable, his love to one remarkable woman who taught him that being saved and being a savior are sometimes the same thing. He gave us all a template for what it means to be fully human. Sarah made it through the service, through the reception at the house, through the days of people stopping by with food and condolences. She made it through the first week, the first month, the terrible milestone of the first holiday without him. What she didn't expect was how completely his absence would reshape her world. She thought she'd prepared herself, but preparation meant nothing when faced with the reality of an empty bed, of coffee made for one, but silence where his voice should be. Claire moved back into the house, refusing to leave Sarah alone. "You were there for me," she said firmly when Sarah protested. "Let me be here for you." So Sarah learned to live in a world without Jackson, one painful day at a time. She threw herself into the work they'd started together, expanded the school, secured funding for the clinic, continued to help women fleeing violence. She told their story to everyone who would listen, teaching by example what Jackson had taught her. That love was the only thing that mattered in the end. Winter came again, as brutal as the one that had brought Claire to their door. Sarah stood at the window watching snowfall, remembering Jackson disappearing into the white to save a stranger's child. She could almost see him out there, tall and strong and impossibly brave. "I'm living," she whispered to the empty room, to his ghost, to the memory of him that lived in her heart. "Just like I promised. I'm living fully and freely and without fear, because you taught me how. I'm loving people the way you loved me, seeing their worth when they can't see it themselves. I'm being strong because you showed me I always was." The wind rattled the windows, and Sarah chose to believe it was his answer, his approval, his eternal presence in the world they'd built together. She was 73 years old when she finally joined him. The doctor said it was her heart, just like Jackson. But Sarah knew better. It was completeness. She'd lived the life he'd wanted for her, full and free and rich with purpose. She'd helped hundreds of women find their strength. She'd watched children grow into adults who carried forward the values of respect and compassion. She'd turned their little ranch into a legacy of love. On her final morning, she woke with clarity and peace. Claire sat beside her bed, holding her hand just as Sarah had once held Jackson's. "Tell me the story," Sarah whispered. "Tell me how it ends." Claire smiled through her tears. "The widow's son heals the beautiful waitress, not knowing she'll repay him with love. They build a life together that touches everyone around them. They face every challenge as partners, choosing each other every single day. When he dies, she grieves but doesn't break because he taught her she was unbreakable. She lives fully, honoring his memory by being exactly who he always knew she could be. And when she finally joins him, she does so knowing she kept every promise, that she lived, she loved, she gave everything she had to make the world better. That's how it ends, Sarah. In triumph, not tragedy." Sarah's eyes closed. Her breathing slowed, and her last words were a whisper. "Together." She died holding Claire's hand, but in her heart, she was already reaching for Jackson's. And somewhere beyond the veil of this world, in whatever comes after, a widow's son waited for his wife with open arms and that rare, full smile that had always been just for her. Their story ended where it began, in salvation, in choice, in the simple, extraordinary power of two people who'd saved each other and spent a lifetime proving that love was the bravest adventure of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Jackson and Sarah's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.